The Embedding by Ian Watson. So this is episode 44 of this series that I'm doing. And this is the first book I've ever read from Ian Watson. I believe it's his first novel he ever published. It was copyright 1976. We have some very interesting, cool artwork on the cover here. I couldn't find any reference on the book, but it looked like it was from Paul Lear. And while it does have, the elements do go along with the book, but not that exact scene, I would say. And there's a little blurb on the back. Now I'm going to call this one spoiler light because it's not really a book I would recommend to many people. The concepts and ideas in the beginning had me hooked and I was ready for a roller coaster ride, but it just seemed like it kind of just kept letting me down, and I kept scratching my head wondering at the end. By the time I got to the end, I was just thinking, what's the point of this book, you know? So there's some areas where I will get into some spoiler light territory, but I'll warn you before I get there. So this book is basically broken up into 3 plot lines that end up converging. I should also mention too, this book was only like 218 pages, and there's a lot that happens in this book. It's one of the few books where I would say one of the cons is it could almost be longer to actually make it work better and tie up the plot lines better. But you got 3 main plot lines. The first one, we have our main character Chris, who's in London. He works at a language research institute, and he works in this top secret section of it. And they've taken these orphaned refugees and they put them in isolation, and they feed them some different language models. They give them drugs to accelerate their learning, and they have them completely isolated. It's mostly like robotics that handle their care and stuff like that. And they're trying to see how humans could develop some different languages based on some different language models. And even the name, the embedding, I didn't know what that really meant, but apparently there's self-embedding and center embedding, and these are common linguistic ideas, I guess. I don't know how common they are today, but in 1976, maybe they were a little bit more prevalent. But anyways, this is a very unethical thing that our main character Chris is doing. I mean, it's horrific what they're putting these kids through really down there. The other plot line, he has a friend named Pierre who's French. They work together in Africa at some point, and Pierre is down in Brazil. Now, down in Brazil, the US and the Brazilian government have come up with this idea to dam the Amazon River and flood the Amazon basin, creating the largest man-made thing ever visible. They said you'd be visible from the moon. They go over some reasons why, but it doesn't seem that plausible. It's more just like it's capitalist Americans and Brazilian government who's willing to exploit their country kind of thing. And Pierre's down there because he's against this thing, and there's some indigenous tribes in this area that's getting flooded at the time. And he's trying to get these tribes to move and get out of these areas. And this one tribe in particular that he's with, they have very unique things going on with their language. They have this like mystical shaman-like figure that's the head of their tribe. They do these psychedelic drugs that are almost like LSD or psilocybin mushrooms, and they're part of their rituals. And instead of fighting the dam in a terroristic way of blowing it up or whatnot, they have different ideas. They're definitely more mystical and metaphysical, and it involves maybe the birth of like some messiah-like child and stuff. And so Pierre gets involved in this whole plot line. He ends up doing drugs, and they end up taking him in and making him almost part of their ceremonies. And then the third plot line is, and this isn't really too much of a giveaway. It's on the back. There's aliens in this book, but there's some Americans who were in like this SETI-like organization where they were actually like bouncing signals off the moon to spy on other countries, I believe, is what they were doing. But when the moon wasn't there, these signals were going off. And what this idea that since the advent of radio and TV, the Earth has been projecting these radio signals at the speed of light. And what they find is some recent signals that had left the Earth got reversed in a, not just sent back, but actually reversed and then sent back. And this group that was kind of spying on other countries intercepted some of these signals. They get intrigued by this, they start investigating it, and then they get the Russians on board. So now we have a joint venture between the American and Russian governments to try to figure out what this is. They find a sphere out there, and it's about 5 days away. They scrap together a mission to send some astronauts up there. They end up landing on this thing, and sure enough, they get invited in, and we have these aliens. They're these tall, slender, humanoid-like aliens, and they want to come down to Earth, and this is all still hidden from most of the population. So they end up figuring out a way to park their big sphere spaceship out somewhere, like above Siberia. They shuttle them down to an undisclosed location in the Nevada desert, and our man Chris over in London, he is pulled because he's a language expert, and they were looking for some of these experts to try to bridge some communication between humanity and the aliens. So an American, Secret Service guy or some level like that, he gets Chris, he brings him over to Nevada, and he's part of this first contact with these aliens. Now, here's where we're probably going to get into spoiler light territory. So what we find out about these aliens is they've been traveling around the galaxy collecting languages. That's like their deal. The concept of this book is a lot about languages. And so they want 6 different languages from humanity, different languages from different parts of the planet. And they're willing to give us technology to help us travel around the solar system and eventually leave the solar system. They also will give us information of the closest inhabitable planet for us in case we end up destroying our own planet. So humanity really wants this information, and it sounds like a slam dunk. They just want some languages. We even have people volunteering to go on a one-way trip with these aliens, like, hey, I'll be the English guy here and I'll be the Russian guy. People are volunteering here in the little conference. But no, the aliens don't want people going with them. They just want their brains. So they have a way of removing the brain from the body, hooking it up into their machine, putting it in the whole thing like they've been doing, and taking it back to their home planet. And they are on a timeline here. They ride the currents of space in order to go faster than the speed of light, which is loosely kind of explained in the book. And so they basically give the humans like 48 hours to come up with like 6 brains before they'll give us this information. So the plot lines then, we will converge after this with the Brazilian plot line, and all 3 plot lines kind of collide, but I'm not really going to go into much of that. But let's just kind of go into pros and cons at this point. So the pros, the ideas in this book are really good. The beginning is really good. It was a short book, but it was a slower read because it was packed with so many ideas. And it's one of these books that doesn't really hold your hand. You're kind of trying to figure out who's who. It just jumps from one plot line to the other, and you just have to kind of keep up with it. And there's parts that are written about the aliens that are kind of hard to understand, but I think some of those parts were done really well. And the idea of language in science fiction, some of these ideas were thought-provoking. It made me look up some of the differences in this, embedding and stuff like that. But that's kind of where the pros end. So the cons for me, you just keep scratching your head as you go further into this book. A lot of it just doesn't make sense, and there's bad stereotypes that are used. Most of everything that's happening is super unethical. You know, you have some really cheesy bad dialogue, especially when it comes to some of the writing of the Americans in this one. And then by the time you find out what happens in this mediocre finale of this book, I was just scratching my head like, what was the point of any of this? You know, and I'm willing to admit, maybe I missed something, but all of the plot lines kind of dead end in a way, and you're just sitting there scratching your head going, what was the point of this book? So, you know, if enough people say I missed something completely, which I'm willing to admit, I maybe would come back at some point and give this one a reread and see if it makes a little bit more sense. But, you know, I looked up real briefly on, I think, Goodreads, and there's some people, if you want some more spoilers, you can go and read Goodreads and see some of the, like, the ending and stuff. But I think a lot of the same vibe was kind of like, what was all that about? But, you know, that's that one. Like I said, I wouldn't really recommend it, but it's done. So next up, I can't really decide yet. I'm still kind of torn between The Moon Pool by Abraham Merritt and We All Died at Breakaway Station by Richard C. Meredith. So you just have to wait for the next video to come out to see which one I chose. And once again, thanks for watching.